I had been on a week-long break from work. When I returned to the hospital for my night shift, everything felt the same, but also different. I was 26 and knew the routine, yet I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I tried to push the feeling away. On my first night back, I was in the main hallway. The soft beeping from monitors filled the silent air. It was late. Everything felt quiet, almost too quiet. Then I heard muffled voices coming from an empty room at the end of the hall. I tried to convince myself it was just the radio left on by the staff. The next few nights were no better. I kept hearing those voices. They became clearer, not just noise but actual conversations. I shook my head and told myself I was just tired, but I couldn't shake the unease. The room was still locked, still dark. One night, as I walked past the door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure. I turned my head fast, but nothing was there. My heart raced. I blamed my anxiety. My mind played tricks on me. As the nights passed, the voices grew louder. I could almost hear words, whispers of secrets. I felt compelled to walk toward the door. My hands were clammy as I reached for the handle. I stopped, taking a deep breath. This was just a job, right? Each shift became a repeat of the last. The voices would stop as I got close. I felt this weight on my chest that wouldn't go away. My co-workers glanced at me, their eyes hinted at something I didn't know. I didn't understand. Was it real? Was someone playing a prank? Or was I losing my mind from exhaustion? On my last night that week, I faced the door again. The hallway felt colder. Hesitation wrapped around me. I wanted to think I was imagining it all, but some force pulled me forward. Suddenly, just behind me, I heard a soft whisper, "Emily." I froze. My heart raced like it was trying to escape. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Panic filled my chest. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I felt like I was being watched. It was a strange feeling, knowing you're supposed to care for patients, yet feeling like something was lurking nearby, waiting. I thought about my long shifts and how I missed my break. Maybe this was the price for being back, that I didn't understand what had happened those nights. I didn't know if it was just me or something more sinister in that room. The shadows still felt real. And those voices kept haunting me. They always come back. I didn't want to come back to the hospital after that last shift. The urge to find out about the voices tugged at me, though. I needed answers. So, on my next scheduled night, I pushed through the dread and returned to my post. The familiar beeping filled the air again as I walked down the main hallway. This time, I felt different. I was determined, yet a shiver raced down my spine. I would confront whatever haunted me. I started my shift, keeping myself distracted by checking in on patients, a routine I'd perfected over the years. Each time I passed that dark room, I felt a pull. I found myself hesitating. The voices were calling again, clearer now. I could almost understand what they were saying. I thought about my co-workers, who I noticed whispering to each other as I walked by. Did they know something I didn't? After a few hours, the quietness of the night was broken by a sudden crash from inside the room. My heart stopped. I couldn't think straight. Was someone really in there? I glanced down the hall, but no one else seemed to notice that I walked toward the door, my feet heavy with uncertainty. As I approached, my whole body tensed. The voices morphed into frantic murmurs now. "Help us," one voice pleaded. Another cried out, "Emily, you have to listen." My skin prickled as I pressed my ear against the door. This couldn't be real. It had to be my imagination running wild. That I turned the handle slowly. The door was locked, just as it had been. My pulse raced. That was the moment I saw it through the small, grimy window. I caught a glimpse of a figure inside. A woman, but blurry, like she was surrounded by static. I hesitated to speak. Maybe if I asked, I would get some sort of response. "Hello?" I whispered. "Is anyone there?" In answer, the figure shifted closer to the glass, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I staggered back, my breath hitching in my throat. Then, just as suddenly, everything went silent. I stood there, stunned, unsure of what to do. I stepped back, ready to dash away, but then I heard it again, a faint sound, like a delicate tapping. I gritted my teeth and leaned in again. "Help us," the voice said, repeated, almost desperately. My hands twitched at my side, wanting to push the door open, but knowing I couldn't. In a moment of wild impulse, I raced back to the nurse's station. I told my coworker Jess about the noises, about everything. For a second, a flicker of concern crossed her face before she masked it with a smile. "Emily, you need to rest. You're overthinking things." I felt dismissed, almost insulted, but she wasn't the reason I felt this pressing urgency. I needed to know what I had seen. As I walked back to the hallway, everything around me dimmed. The lights flickered, and I could feel the oppressive air closing in. Deep down, I started to question my own sanity. What was really happening in that room? Then I remembered the old hospital archives. A fire had swept through a section of the hospital years ago, claiming lives. Maybe it was connected? I had to find out more. When the lights went out completely. Everything was dark, and I was left alone in the suffocating silence. My heart hammered in my chest. I took a deep breath and pulled out my flashlight. I needed answers, but I needed to be wary of whatever was lurking in those shadows. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. It felt like an eye boring into the shadows, daring something to reveal itself. My breath echoed in the stillness as I turned back towards that ominous room. I had to know what was happening behind that locked door. I crept closer, the light flickering against the walls. The tapping had stopped, but the emptiness felt thick with anticipation. I rapped my knuckles lightly on the door, hoping for a reply. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence felt like a weight on my chest. Then, a sudden crash erupted from inside the room, making me jump. My instincts screamed at me to run away, but curiosity held me in place. I took a shaky step back, but all I could think was that something terrible had occurred there. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something glinting on the ground by the door. Bending down, I shone my flashlight toward it. It was a small key, shiny and recently lost. My heart raced. Was this the key to the room? Was it just coincidence or fate? Unease twisted in my stomach, but I had come this far. I picked it up and felt its weight in my palm. With cautious determination, I approached the door again. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and I stood frozen for a moment, breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Darkness enveloped me as I stepped inside. The beam of my flashlight revealed a room in disarray. Papers scattered across the floor, and an overturned chair lay against the wall. There was no one there. Just an unsettling emptiness and the stale smell of something burnt. I scanned the room, feeling a mix of dread and relief, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. "Hello?" I tried again, but it felt useless. No response. The wall opposite me had strange scratches, like something had clawed at it. My heart pounded, and I fought the urge to turn back. Just then, I caught movement in the corner of my flashlight's beam. A figure materialized from the shadows, hazy and indistinct. My heart raced as I stumbled back, almost tripping over the debris. "Who are you?" I barely managed to stammer. The figure didn't respond with words but raised a hand. It pointed toward a small, charred piece of paper lying on the floor. I crouched down, leaning closer. It was just a scrap, but certain words were still legible: warn, fire, danger. It sent a chill through me. Then the whispers returned, swirling around me, louder than before. "Help us!" they pleaded. My skin prickled with fear. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness, voice shaking. The figure faded, leaving me alone once more. I felt a hot rush of panic as I stumbled back toward the exit, the whispers growing frantic. "Emily, you must know," they urged, layering their voices into one desperate cry. I turned and fled the room, slamming the door behind me. The lock clicked back into place, but the questions were only starting. I clutched the key tightly, breathless and trembling. What had I uncovered? Had I opened a door better left shut? Outside, the corridor felt eerily quiet again. But as I stumbled toward the nurse's station, determined to share what I had seen, the air shifted. I could have sworn I heard a faint laugh echoing down the hallway, chilling my blood. I quickened my pace, knowing deep down that this wasn't over. I had disturbed something that wasn't ready to be forgotten. I hurried down the dim hallway, my heart racing with each step. My mind was a jumble of thoughts, and I felt the lingering presence of the figure in the room and those desperate whispers. What did they mean by warning me? And what fire? As I reached the nurse's station, I finally caught my breath. The area was empty, my colleagues were probably busy or taking a break. I had to share what I'd experienced, but the words felt stuck in my throat. I forced myself to calm down, taking a moment before pushing through the anxiety. "Hey, Sandra?" I called out. No response. I glanced around, confused. It wasn't like her to leave the station unattended. I walked around the desk, my flashlight beam illuminating the cluttered space. The old clock ticked loudly, the only sound in the silence. That's when I saw it. A notebook lay open, pages fluttering slightly as if a breeze had passed through. I approached it, heart pounding again, because on the exposed page was a detailed list of patients, their statuses, and some notes that caught my eye. Strange occurrences. The phrase made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't the only one who had experienced something off. I flipped further through the notebook, looking for more details. One passage stood out. It detailed an incident where several patients had reported seeing a mysterious figure. Shadows in their rooms, odd noises at night. It named some of the very rooms I had wandered into. My hands trembled, and I had to set the notebook down to steady myself. An unsettling shadow flickered in my peripheral vision, and I turned quickly. My heart dropped when I caught sight of another figure, this time much closer. I breathed in sharply, trying to calm my racing heart. "Hello?" I called out, catching the outline of a woman standing just down the hall. She didn't respond but kept staring at me. I wanted to move closer, to get a better look, but my instincts screamed to stay put. The whispers floated back into my ears, the cries for help, the warning. Suddenly, she turned and started walking away from me, moving deeper into the corridor. Something compelled me to follow her. I called out again, "Wait!" But my voice echoed back to me, swallowed by the void of the space. The figure stopped briefly as if waiting for me to catch up, but then she continued, gliding with an unnatural grace that sent chills down my spine. As I followed, the air felt electric, charged with an unexplainable energy. I was stepping deeper into a nightmare. The figure rounded a corner and disappeared into the darkness. Fear gripped me, but I pressed on. I hesitated at the corner, battling the urge to turn back, and just as I summoned the courage to take a step forward, I heard it again, that laugh, echoing down the hall. Nothing about it sounded friendly. My heart thundered in my chest. I felt a change in the atmosphere. A shadow loomed over me like an approaching storm, then it hit me like a bolt. The whispers weren't just pleas, they were warnings. I needed to leave, but the moment I turned to retreat, the lights flickered, and the corridor plunged into darkness. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, the only sound the chaos of my breath and the ominous laughter that had grown closer. I could feel something watching me. I raised my flashlight, the beam weak and flickering. My legs screamed for me to run, but my mind was frozen with dread. What had I uncovered? What was in the shadows waiting for me? I needed to find Sandra and fast. I stood frozen in the oppressive darkness, breathing heavily as silence enveloped me. The laughter faded into an eerie stillness, but I could still feel the weight of unseen eyes. My flashlight flickered hopelessly, the beam barely illuminating the looming shadows. The instinct to flee wrestled with my desperate need for answers. I turned on my heel, the soft soles of my shoes barely whispering against the linoleum. I strained to hear any sound besides my own heartbeat, but all I could hear was a faint sound, the rustle of fabric. It was unusual, almost like someone was shifting behind the nearby nurse's station. I hesitated and glanced over my shoulder, my heart racing anew. Was it just my imagination, or was someone lurking near the desk? I took a deep breath and edged back, cautiously approaching the nurse's station. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, forcing my voice to remain steady. My finger trembled as it hovered over the flashlight switch. Just then, the sound stopped, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I strained to hear anything, but the quiet was deafening, punctuated only by the ticking clock. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement. It was quick, darting just out of sight. Adrenaline surged through me, and I spun around, ready for anything. As I turned, I almost tripped over the fallen chair that had been kicked back against the wall. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself, scrambling back to my feet. My flashlight illuminated the chair, but I was only met with darkness beyond. Had someone knocked it over in a hurry? I felt my pulse quicken as I considered the implications. Suddenly, the flickering lights returned, casting sickly yellow glows around the room. That's when I noticed it smeared across the floor, a dark streak that looked as if it had been hastily wiped away. I knelt down to examine it. My stomach turned as I realized it was a trail of blood. Or at least a deep red liquid that left a series of streaks fading into the hallway. Panic welled up inside me. I shot up and swung my flashlight around, convinced something had happened right here, and I was too late to stop it. My chest tightened as I thought of the patients, their faces filled with terror. I took a hesitant step back, feeling the urge to run. The whispers returned in a rush, filling my ears like a chorus of dread. Without thinking, I sprinted down the hall, desperation pushing me on. I needed to find Sandra. I rounded the corner and skidded to a halt, breathless because in front of me stood a half-open door. Weak light spilled from inside, and I could hear muffled voices. My heart raced at the thought that she might be in there. "Sandra!" I called out as I approached, glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure again. No one emerged, but the voices were clearer now. They were frantic, rising and falling in pitch. I pushed the door open wider, hoping to find her safe. Instead, I was met with an unexpected sight. A group of colleagues stood gathered, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Sandra among them, but something was off. They were looking at something on the floor, muttering to each other in hushed tones. "What is going on?" I stammered as I stepped inside. I followed their gazes and felt a chill shoot through me. A body lay at their feet, motionless. My heart dropped, and panic twisted in my stomach. Who was it? But as I focused on the figure, I realized with dread that it wasn't just anyone. It was the woman from the hallway, the figure I had chased. Cold dread gripped me as I waved my hands to get their attention. "What happened? Is she?" But before I could finish, the lights began to flicker again, plunging us into darkness once more. I felt the frantic energy of the group and knew we were not alone. And then I heard it again. The laughter echoed. This time, closer. The darkness wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. I could barely see the terrified faces of my colleagues illuminated in brief moments by the flickering lights. Their eyes darted around, mirroring my own panic. The laughter faded in and out, mocking our confusion. I fought the urge to scream. Instead, I edged closer to Sandra, desperate to find comfort in her presence. A strange mix of relief and fear washed over me as I reached her side. What the hell happened? I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her face pale, eyes wide. I don't know. We heard a scream earlier. Before she could finish, the lights flickered again, plunging us into complete darkness. Heart pounding, I felt the walls closing in. Then came the sound shuffling footsteps, echoing off the sterile walls. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. Who's there? One of my colleagues called out, the quiver in his voice betraying his fear. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. All of a sudden, a strong beam of light illuminated the doorway behind us. I turned, squinting against the brightness, my mind racing. Could it be help? But as the light flickered, it revealed not a savior, but a shadowy figure standing just outside the room. Get back! I shouted, instinctively stepping in front of Sandra as I raised the flashlight, but the beam faltered, flickering on and off. My hands trembled. The figure remained still, its outline just a silhouette against the blinding light. Another voice broke through the tension, a frantic plea. We need to leave. Now. The group erupted in panic. I scanned the room, feeling the heat of urgency swirl around me. What about her? I gasped, pointing to the woman's body. Sandra gripped my arm. We can't stay here. But as I turned to look back, the body was gone. My heart sank, and my breath caught in my throat. What? No. She was right there. I stammered, scrambling to locate her again. Are you sure? Another colleague, Emma, whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. I saw her. She was right there. I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. The laughter returned, louder and closer, wrapping around us like a malicious echo. I felt a chill settle into my bones. We have to move. I urged again, pulling on Sandra's arm, urgency clawing at my insides. Suddenly, a soft thud came from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The group pressed closer together, their silhouettes merging in the dim light. Whoever it is, I whispered, glancing back at the dark corridor, they sound like they're limping. Then everything went dark again, the type of dark that feels alive. Panic coursed through the air, a palpable buzz of fear. That's when I saw it through the shadows, something shifting at the edge of the doorway, a pair of glinting eyes staring directly at me. I felt a surge of dread. There's someone in here. I shouted, my instinct screaming for action. The air grew heavier after I shouted. My colleagues jumped, adrenaline coursing through them like wildfire. They huddled close to one another, eyes wide and breaths quickening. My heart raced as I tried to keep my gaze fixed on those glowing eyes, but the shadows swirled around the outline of the figure, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who are you? I demanded, my voice trembling yet firm. No response came, just a creeping silence that crawled under my skin. The eyes blinked slowly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. A whisper barely audible drifted from the darkness. Help me stay together. I yelled, panic bubbling to the surface as I gripped the flashlight, willing it to stay bright. The beam flickered again but finally steadied, illuminating the doorway more fully. My throat constricted as I managed a weak laugh, half in disbelief. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, a figment of our collective fear, but as I took a hesitant step forward, I froze. The figure was now clearer, a woman, disheveled, her clothes stained with something dark. I blinked, unsure if I was imagining it. Is it her? Emma whispered, her voice quivering. My mind raced as I took in the details. The woman's face showed signs of terror, her eyes wide and pleading. Please, she choked out, don't let them get you. Another thud rang out from the hallway, and I spun to look, my breath hitching in my chest. What do you mean? I stammered, confused as to whether this woman needed saving or was somehow part of the horror we were caught in. The flickering lights in the hallway cast long shadows that danced around us. I could feel the weight of panic threatening to crush us. We need to go. Now. I urged again, trying to steady my trembling hands as I turned back toward the woman, but she wasn't there anymore. One instant she was a breath away, and the next, gone. A wave of nausea washed over me. I couldn't trust what I was seeing, I couldn't tell what was real. Where did she go? Sandra asked, her voice stark with alarm. Before I could answer, the hallway filled with muffled sounds, grunts and a low growl that made my stomach drop. I felt a primal instinct kick in, and suddenly, I realized we were not just fighting to escape the darkness, something wanted to keep us here. The group shifted nervously, their expressions ranging from confusion to sheer terror. "It's coming!" Someone shouted, fear-laden urgency in their voice. "Get in there!" I yelled, pointing toward the nearest room, desperation guiding my decision. We couldn't stay in the open corridor. But as we bolted for the doorway, the flickering light flickered one last time before failing completely, plunging us into a suffocating abyss. Then came the unmistakable sound, a low, raspy breath, right behind me. I spun around, instinctively raising the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but empty space. Everyone was close now, their faces drawn tight with fear. I could feel their anxious breaths mingling with my own. "Did you hear that?" I murmured, trying to calm the rising tide of panic that surged within me. A nod from Emma was all I got in response, her eyes wide as she pressed against Sandra. "It sounded almost human," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, the growl came again, closer this time. I felt it vibrate through the floor, a low rumble that sent chills racing along my spine. "Back, back!" I ordered, pushing everyone toward the nearest room. The door creaked as we shoved it open and squeezed inside. It was a storage room crammed with unused medical supplies and boxes labeled in faded ink. We huddled against the wall, breaths shallow and quick. I flicked on the flashlight again, illuminating the glimmering metal instruments that lined the shelves. "What do we do?" Sandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. "We wait. Maybe it'll pass," I said, but I felt the weight of my words. Waiting felt like an invitation to whatever was lurking in the hall. The noise outside faded for a moment, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat. Just as I thought we might be out of danger, something crashed against the door, rattling the frame and sending a surge of dread through me. "Get ready," I hissed, positioning the flashlight like a weapon. "Is it the woman?" Emma peered at me, fear stitched across her features. "No, it's something else." The thud came again. Then, without warning, the door swung open. We all screamed, but it was only a supply cart, pushed by the abandoned breeze coursing through the hallway. I let out a shaky breath. "What the hell? Did someone just leave it there?" Sandra asked, eyes shifting as if the shadows might suddenly spring to life. "It doesn't matter. We need to find the others," I said, stepping cautiously out of the room. The hallway was still dark, and the air felt thick with something unnameable. As we moved ahead, I spotted something glistening on the floor. I knelt down, my heart racing faster with each second. It was a small metal pendant, familiar yet distorted. I reached for it, the moment chilling me to the bone. It was a charm I saw on the woman. "Do you think?" Emma began, but I cut her off. "This was hers," I whispered, nearly losing my voice. Before I could process it, the temperature dropped sharply. I felt a presence brush past me, and I could see my breath misting in the frigid air. It had returned. Suddenly, the electric hum of fluorescent lights buzzed back to life, illuminating the hallway in stark, glaring brightness. And that's when I saw it silhouetted at the end of the hall, the woman's face peering back at me, lips twisted in a silent scream. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then she vanished, leaving me with one unforgivable choice: to pursue the specter or to flee from the nightmare unfolding. I made my choice. There was no way I could turn back now. The urge to chase her down overwhelmed my fear, so I darted forward, flashlight cutting through the brightness. The others hesitated but followed my lead. I could see hesitation mirrored in their eyes, but terror propelled us all further into the unknown. The hallway opened into a wide waiting area, plastic chairs piled haphazardly, old magazines forgotten on coffee tables. It was eerily quiet, almost reverent. I directed the beam of the flashlight across the room. But nothing moved until I heard it again. A whisper. "Help me." The voice was soft and desperate, floating through the stillness. It sounded like it came from the staff room down another corridor. "Did you hear that?" Emma's eyes were darting toward the sound, her body tense. "I did," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. "We should check it out." With caution, we stepped into the corridor leading to the staff room. Each footfall echoed, amplifying our collective anxiety. As we neared the doorway, the whisper grew louder, more urgent. "Help me please." When we reached the door, it swung open suddenly. We jumped back, hearts racing, ready to confront whatever waited for us. Inside, pieces of scattered papers and overturned chairs hinted at a struggle. But no one was there. "What the hell happened?" Sandra asked, stepping into the chaotic room. "I don't know." The words caught in my throat as I noticed something on the floor, a bloodied shirt, its collar torn. My pulse quickened. "This is not right." As I bent down to inspect it, I felt a presence behind me, cold air creeping up my spine. I turned, and there she was again. The woman, her features more defined than before, her eyes hollow and pleading. "Why are you here?" I managed to choke out, feeling paralyzed. She pointed down the corridor, her mouth moving but no sound emerged. Panic washed over me. I couldn't comprehend what she wanted. Before I could think, she blinked and then vanished, leaving me breathless. I felt the urge to follow, but the others were frozen, horror painted across their faces. "What do we do?" Emma's voice was cracking. "We have to find out what happened to her." I made my decision again, stepping toward where she had pointed. The corridor stretched out ahead, dark and foreboding. I felt a strong pull drawing me closer, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I pushed through. As we moved, lights flickered back on, illuminating another door at the end of the hallway. It creaked as I edged it open. Inside, a small room held a flickering monitor with security footage. But the image was disjointed and static-filled. I leaned in closer. It wasn't just any footage. It showed the woman, running frantically down the hall, chased by shadowy figures I couldn't quite identify. Then everything went quiet again. The monitor glitched, and the image changed. I gasped. There was a brief flash of her face. This time, though, she wasn't scared. She looked angry, her lips moving again, and it felt like I could hear it, "Save me." Whatever had unfolded here was far from over. My heart was racing as I turned to the others. They looked as lost as I felt, but there was no time for uncertainty. That urgency thrummed in my veins, but just when I thought I could grasp the edges of understanding, a loud crash echoed through the hospital. Something or someone was approaching. I felt the breath catch in my throat. Whatever hope I held was slipping away. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. I hurriedly turned back, trying to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The sound from the hallway grew louder, mixed with the echoes of laughter that seemed to taunt me. My heart raced as I felt the walls close in, pushing me deeper into the control room. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait for whatever was coming. "Emily, what now?" Sandra's voice shook me from my frantic state. Her fear mirrored my own, but her eyes held a fierce determination. "We can't stay here." "We might." Before she could finish, the lights flickered around us again, bathing the room in an unsettling glare. The monitor whispered static, then the vision cleared for a moment. There it was again, the woman, her expression sharp with pain and urgency. "Help us," echoed around the room, not just from the monitor but from every corner. The whispers morphed into a cacophony. "Help us! Help us!" The sheer intensity of the cries paralyzed me. I felt the room vibrating with energy, each whisper a plea, and I knew I had to respond. "We have to find her again. Whatever's happening, she's the key." "Are you insane?" Emma cried out, taking a hesitant step backward. "We can't go back out there." But the entity outside wasn't going to wait. The door rattled violently, and I knew the shadows would soon breach the threshold. "We don't have a choice," I insisted, gathering all my courage. "We need to confront this, whatever it is." Against their protests, I backed away from the door to gain momentum. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I hurled myself at the door, slamming against it with all my strength. It flung open, and I staggered into the hallway, light from the monitors illuminating the deepening darkness. The corridor stretched out before me, shadows lingering like a thick mist. "Emily!" Sandra called, panic etched on her face. The laughter echoed riotously behind her, a chilling reminder of what lurked in the void. But fear propelled me forward. I needed answers. I charged down the hallway, calling out, "Show yourself." The whispers intensified, wrapping around me like a living thing, and I could almost make out the urgency behind them. I could feel the weight of the presence I was chasing as I pressed on. Suddenly, I spotted her standing at the end, the woman I had seen before. But this time, she was surrounded by misty shadow figures that writhed around her. Her expression changed from desperate to furious, and she pointed straight at me, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. "Help us! You have to!" She was cut off as one of the dark figures lunged toward her. I felt my heart drop as it collided with her, the sound echoing like a frightened gasp. "Emily! Wait!" I heard someone shout behind me, but the words barely registered as a surge of energy coursed through me. I took one last step forward, gripping the metal pendant I had found her charm, a connection bridging between us. With it clutched tightly in my palm, I yelled back, "Let her go!" In a rush of motion, the shadows recoiled as if struck, their forms seeming to flicker and fade under the brightness of the pendant in my hand. The whispers grew louder, mingling with cries of distress that surrounded me. The woman turned, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of hope and fear, as if she recognized the power I now held. The shadows howled, a deafening cacophony that echoed down the hall. I could see at the edges of reality breaking as the darkness rose up against the brilliance of the charm. I felt something shift behind me, a rush of turbulent air, an instinct to flee, but I stood my ground and shouted louder, "No more! You don't control us!" The surge of energy exploded as if lightning had struck the entire corridor. I felt it shoot through me, illuminating the space with brilliant light. But within that brilliance, the shadows began to blur. The figures screamed and then fell away, dissolving like mist in the sunlight, their cries merging into a deafening roar. The woman's form started to flicker too, her expression shifting into one of gratitude and sorrow, and just as quickly as it began, the brilliance faded. I staggered back, feeling the exhaustion hit me like a truck, my legs weak beneath me. The corridor fell silent, eerily still, and in that stillness, I caught my breath, panting. The woman was gone, but the weight of her presence lingered, a silent victory, possibly. My heart hammered wildly in my chest, the realization washing over me. We had confronted something monstrous, but I still felt like I hadn't entirely understood it. There were no answers, no neat endings. I turned back slowly as my colleagues caught up with me. They looked just as shaken, bewildered by the surreal unfolding of events. I saw fear and disbelief reflected in their faces. "Emily, what just happened?" Sandra asked, the tremor still in her voice. I opened my mouth to respond, but the truth was I wasn't sure. I just knew we made it through that night. "I don't know," I replied softly, looking down the hall where the shadows still lingered, a reminder of what we faced. "But we survived. We all exchanged glances, understanding without saying a word. Whatever had happened, the atmosphere felt different. The whispers had quieted, and although the echoes of terror lingered, they were quieter now, almost a whisper to my fleeting thoughts. As we stepped out of the hospital into the graying dawn, I looked back at the building. I still couldn't tell if it had been real or the manifestation of something darker. Sometimes, I think about it, the voices, the uncertainty. And I wonder if whatever was left lurking in the shadows would ever come back for us, but really, I try not to think about it.